that don't want what we know out there.
How a person can go from really almost nothing to becoming a millionaire by owning rental properties.
He would always buy these flip houses, and I just remember thinking, this guy is crazy. Why would he buy that house?
In the past decade, there's been a huge surge in the peer-to-peer short-term rental market.
Become an insider. So you have to know the rules before you get the game.
Every second counts. So make every second count.
Welcome to the Real Estate Jam. Whether you're just beginning or the best of the best, we're glad you're here. We will share successes, failures, and strategies for the action-taking real estate investor. And now to your hosts, JD and Melissa.
Hi guys, welcome to the Real Estate Jam podcast. I'm JD with my beautiful and talented co-host.
Thank you, JD. You're Melissa, so nice.
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa's been having a rough day. She's been dealing with a lot of time wasters. So we're hoping to definitely...
So I'm in a bad mood. Super bad mood.
We're definitely trying to improve her mood by not wasting your guys' time, not wasting our time. We're going to jump right into it. We're excited to bring a guest that's a little outside of what we normally do, but I do think it's relevant, especially based off of some of the conversations we've had lately. This is Trevor Oldham, and he is the CEO, founder, big boss man over at Podcasting U. And we're going to have a pretty interesting conversation about podcasting, especially podcasting for real estate investors, because I know there's been quite a few questions about that.
Yeah, our questions, as well as quite a few of our friends have podcasts as well. So yeah. I think they'll find this good subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Trevor, thank you so much for finding time to come on our show today. We're glad to have you here.
Yeah, I'm certainly excited to chat with you today, JD and Melissa.
Awesome. Well, Trevor, maybe you can just bring our audience up to speed on a little bit of your background and how you got started, and then we'll just take the conversation from there.
Sure, that sounds perfect. My start began back in 2015, and it was at that time I decided to launch my own podcast. No other reason other than, hey, I thought it'd be cool to start my own show. Did that for about 2 years, and part of that process, I was doing everything on my own. And what that meant was booking guests, I was doing the show notes, editing the show, basically just doing all the grunt work when it came to podcasting. And I was still in college at that time, and I wanted to make some extra cash while I was still in school. So I started freelancing out my skills, and I started picking up a lot of these clients that wanted to get booked on podcasts, also do the show notes and edit their show. And I found after a while, I really enjoyed the aspect of getting clients booked on shows. One, it wasn't so much an hourly wage. I started working off of a commission. So if I book you on a show, JD, say I bill you $100 and it takes me 15 minutes, where if I was doing audio editing, I might charge $50 an hour. I'm spending more of my time there. Yeah. So I really transitioned the business over to getting people booked on podcasts. Did that for about 3 years. And I was just working in so many different niches. You're thinking of your real estate investors, your health coaches, your lawyers, politicians, you name it. And I was like, I'm spreading myself like way too thin here. It's hard to keep up with all these different niches. And who are the folks that I love to work with the most? And it just happened to be the real estate investing clients. Mm-hmm. They were always the easiest to work with, easiest to get along with. And I just made that decision about 4 years ago. Let's just go all in and working with real estate investors, working with real estate folks. And it's been great since then. And even now we're expanding a little bit beyond it into like the oil and gas space, into the really alternative investment space. We're working with a company that you can buy and sell barrels of whiskey, but it's crazy. It's like you need like $1 million to just invest with them. It's a pretty crazy investment. But yeah, pretty much anything in the alternative investment space is sort of what we've gravitated to over the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, it's definitely really hard because when you're first starting out, whether it's in any business, real estate, being an agent, being a podcast media manager, I don't even know what the appropriate term would be, but you at first you just grab any client that you can to help provide value to them and receive some sort of monetary compensation in return. But as you build up your business expertise, you start to niche it down, because before you niche down, you have to be, you know the podcast space, you know how to upload podcasts, edit them, do all that stuff, but you also have to understand something about the podcast that you're editing in order for it to resonate with the audience that you're trying to reach. And if you're dental hygienist and real estate and digital media marketing and all of these other topics, then you're not, you can only learn so much about them and what resonates with those audiences. So I'm glad to hear that you were able to niche it down to stuff that you like first and stop trading your personal time for dollars and start providing the service for dollars. I like that idea business wise.
Sure.
Not as the guy with the podcast. If it took you 15 minutes to book me on a show, I want to pay you $7.50 an hour. But obviously there's more work than that goes into it. So I guess, can you first explain to me, like, now what your business looks like and what services you guys are providing for real estate investors, for the barrel of liquor salesmen and that kind of stuff. Yeah. What are you actually doing?
Yeah, most certainly. So like our main service offering is going out there and getting people booked on podcasts. So we're basically almost acting as like a PR company in a nutshell. And I never really thought of it as a term PR, but enough of our clients were asking us if we were a PR company. And I was like, I never studied PR in college. I never knew anything about PR other than people would pay me good money. So why not just stick with it? But yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we do is we get our clients booked on podcasts. And it can be for any number of reasons. Some are just looking to do brand awareness. Some are looking to just network with these hosts. And then a lot of our clients are raising capital. So they're trying to get in front of more of your high net worth investors. So that's going to be like our barrel whiskey company. And then, a lot of our clients, they're in multifamily, they're in self-storage, they're in mobile home parks. And then even if it's someone that says that is flipping houses or they're wholesaling, but if they're a coach, then it makes sense. And they want to go on podcasts because they want to get coaching clients. And then same with like real estate agents. That was a tricky area we found with real estate agents because there's not very many local market specific podcasts for an agent. But if it's an agent that could go and speak across the entire US, like we worked with a couple of real estate agents where they have like coaching and training programs where it's applicable in Florida, Texas, California, you name it. So that's our bread and butter. Outside of that, we'll book guests for podcast hosts that just don't want to take the time to find guests. And then we'll do a little bit of editing and social media content creation as well.
Awesome.
Very nice.
Okay, so one, I can say running our podcast, and I think I think this will be like episode 200 or high 190s. What I see is there's quite a few companies that are out there doing that and finding guests, and they come to us and say, hey, do we want this guest on our show? But one of the things that you mentioned is a lot of real estate investors that are trying to raise money, and every time we get one of those that asks to be on the show, I'm like, man, because most of those guys, they come in and they say, hey, I'm going to provide these awesome opportunities, and then they only talk about their fund and how they need money and raising money, and they're not providing value. So my number one thing for you would be tell these dudes that they need to provide value first, and that will attract people to them, as opposed to coming out and pitching me their multi-family investment property. I don't know how you get that through. I think a lot of times it's just the type of person you have on the show.
Yeah, for sure. And like syndication too.
Yeah, the syndication space is full with guys who want to be on your podcast, but don't want to provide any value.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's many reasons that investors would want to get on to other people's podcasts. And I think the most important thing for us getting on other people's podcasts is to share audiences and grow our podcast. That's the biggest value. Do you have any tips for people maybe who can't afford to go out and hire a company like yours, but are still looking to get on to somebody else's podcast?
Yeah, most certainly. So I sort of say like the piggyback strategy. So if it's someone that's newer, you probably want to start off with your smaller shows and then go to your larger or medium shows and then go to your larger shows. And I say a small show, we're talking a show, maybe 10 episodes that is out there. And you basically would want to put together a pitch. And it can just be something simple, why you should be a guest on the show, or why should the host have you as a guest on their show? Maybe include some talking points. I'd recommend that you do get a one sheet. We have an in-house designer that designs our one sheet, but you could go out there on Fiverr and probably hire someone for like $25, $50 to design a nice one sheet. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's almost like a resume where you can go further into your bio, further into the questions. You can include like your social media links, because within that pitch that you're sending out, you don't want to like make it like 3, 4 paragraphs long. Like no one's going to have that time to sit there and read through that. So I again recommend reaching out to those shows and just being consistent. And there's tools you can use. Like you can use a tool called Listen Notes. You can use a tool called Raphonic. They're going to run you about 150 bucks a month if you don't want to pay for them. And I find that they're helpful. They have like contact information and it's easy to access the show. You could go directly on iTunes and search for it. The only problem I found with searching for shows on iTunes is a lot of times it'll list a show that's outdated. And what I mean by that is a show that hasn't had an episode in 6 months, a show that hasn't been out in a year, 2 years. So you don't really necessarily want to be wasting your time reaching out to a show that, you know, for all intents and purposes is inactive or no longer around. And then over time, as you become more comfortable going on those shows, then maybe you reach out to those medium shows, and then your medium shows are maybe shows that have 50 episodes, and then your larger shows that have over 100 episodes. And then you're thinking along those lines is coupled. If you've never been on a podcast before, you're probably going to be like uncomfortable unless like you're like super extroverted and know what you're going to be talking about. So like, why waste your time going on one of these larger shows that are out there and sort of wasting your opportunity? Where if you go on a show that came out 2 months ago, odds are there's probably not going to be that many people listening to that show. And then if you make a mistake, if you say too many times, or you know, you pause too much because you don't know what to say, you know, you're going to overcome that over time, but it's going to take a lot of practice. I remember the first couple of times, even running like a podcast agency, you know, I was pretty terrible as a guest, pretty terrible as a host. It's just, you know, it's just natural. Over time you're going to get better at it. But definitely I find like that's probably the biggest thing that stops people from going on these podcasts, is just like that fear of almost like the unknown. They think they're going to make a fool of themselves. And trust me, it's going to be okay if you do that. I've done that myself. You know, even running my own agency that helps people get on podcasts, I've, you know, messed up numerous of times.
Sure, and it happens too. Even to us today, you know, sometimes we have podcast guests on that for whatever reason the chemistry's just off. They might be super smart, and most of our guests, you know, I'm following them in social media, listening to other stuff, but sometimes when you're having a conversation, the connection's just not there, and everybody sounds like an idiot. It just happens.
Yeah,
right?
I definitely agree with that. Sure. I know, like even like there was a show I was on like a week or two ago, and it was just like the chemistry just wasn't there. I never knew if he was like asking me a question or if he was just letting me talk, or if he was gonna say, and it was just off, you know. But the one before the one I had 3 weeks ago, the chemistry was good. So you never know if the host is having an off day, or maybe something happened in your personal time. I've had guests where I know he came to when I was interviewing him, he came to the show and he lost out on a deal like 5 minutes earlier. And he was just like, you know, he lost like $250,000 he would have made on the deal, and was just so mad. And it's like, now I got to handle that situation while interviewing someone. You know, it makes for an interesting time.
Yeah,
sure.
I feel for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's just get it real down to the basics. Really, so back in 2015, podcasting was relatively new. There definitely were some podcasts, and even if you go a little bit before that, like 2006, 2008, we were starting to listen to podcasts, but it felt like anybody who started a podcast and just stuck with it would take off. But now, especially in the real estate space, do you feel like it's a little oversaturated with all of these pop-up podcasts, like ours included, right? Like everybody who's in real estate does a podcast, is what it feels like. Should somebody stay away from starting their own podcast because they see other people in the space doing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, it kind of brings back some painful memories back when I started my own show in 2015, and I stopped at about, you know, the end, close to 2017. I think back then I think I was getting like 5,000 to 10,000 downloads an episode. And for me, I didn't realize how big that was for a podcast. It was just so easy to pick up listeners because there's such a small handful of shows. And I think I was like 65 episodes in. I wish looking back, I wish I would have stuck.
Kept it going.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and then nowadays I find that if you're going to start a podcast, one, you got to know you're going to be in it for the long run. It's probably going to take, close to 6 months, at least 12 months, maybe 2 years before you start seeing some real traction from it. And the reason I find people fail at starting podcasts nowadays is they just anticipate, hey, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to get hundreds, thousands of downloads pretty much right away. And once you
Monetize
already
it right
have like
away.
that following, it's going to take a long time for you to do that. So it's gonna be hard when you're sitting down there and maybe you're spending 2-3 hours a week interviewing guests and you're getting 4 or 5 downloads an episode. But that's just sort of the way that it starts off and the way that it could potentially be for the first couple months. So the people they're 10 episodes in, they're not seeing the traction, and then they just quit.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, it's also just not having like a good direction. It's like, who do you want to have as a guest on your show? Are you just want to talk to like your general real estate investors? Do you want to talk to just successful people, whether they're a real estate investor or just an entrepreneur?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk to folks that are just wholesalers or house flippers? And sort of just picking that niche and then going along that side. There's so much value when you have guests on your show and creating like social media content for them and creating social media content for your show. Because you could imagine we're talking here today, say it's 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes or so. You could probably pull 4 or 5, 6 social media clips. You post them on your social media. I post them on my social media. Now you're getting the added advantage of one, not having to think about what content to create.
Yeah.
But then also two, I'm posting you in front of my audience. They listen to the interview, then all of a sudden they find out about both of you, and you get that added recognition. And then obviously over time, the more podcasts, the higher quality guests, I should say, that you have on, and then you share that with them. Then all of a sudden they start sharing it. You start to surround yourself with those folks. And I'm just thinking of a name, and whether you like him or you don't, say like Grant Cardone, he has millions of social media followers out there. And let's say you did a super good, high quality interview with him. You created super good quality social media content for him to repurpose and share. And then he's sharing your interview that you did together with his audience, and now all of a sudden his audience is being exposed to you. And again, that's a large example. You have to work at it probably a long time. I don't think Grant's going to just go on any show, especially if it's newer, unless you have a personal connection. But just as an example, you can really gravitate off the guest audience over time. And again, it just takes a long time. And that's why I find people just quit, because they're like, oh, this is so much work between, especially if you're newer and you don't have the budget and you're editing the show yourself, you're doing the show notes, you're booking the guests. There's a lot to it. I mean, I remember back when I was doing it, it was like 10-15 hours a week of doing everything on top of going to school full time. And a lot of folks that do it, they have a full-time job and they think it's going to be nice and easy. And until you learn it, it's not going to be nice and easy, unless you can go out and outsource and hire someone to do it. But yeah, that's really the reason I find people just don't have a successful show, is they just think it's going to be nice and easy and don't really put any of the work into it.
Sure. Yeah, we definitely found that. I think, we ran up against that, like, hey, we're not monetizing this show. We're not running ads. We're not, doing any type of monetization activities, but it does, and we don't have time to do all of this stuff ourselves. So we outsource that. Originally, when we started this podcast, we decided that we were doing it because we wanted to provide value to the people in our network that are, and I guess this might sound a little rude, but I don't mean it that way. We get asked the same questions over and over and over and over again from people looking to get into real estate, and from, people looking to scale their business, for, all of that kind of stuff. And we wanted a place where we could direct them when we didn't have time to stop whatever we're doing and the business stuff that we're working on to do that. And that's really kind of the mentality that we've had with it pretty much the whole time. But every once in a while, especially when our weeks are booked and one or two podcast guests cancel because everybody has their own lives, and now we're scrambling last minute Sunday at midnight to get an episode out, when really, if you're running a podcast, you should have a couple in the tank all the time, just for those kind of incidents. But we all get busy, and so when we're 12 o'clock Sunday night trying to get a podcast done because we've been posting consistently for years and years and years, you really think like, hey, is this worth it? And definitely the only way we've been able to do it is outsourcing the video editing and posting and all of that stuff. I don't even know how you would post your podcast if we did it, because it's just difficult. I also heard somewhere along the line within the last 6 months or so that if you have more than 20 downloads on your episode, you're in like the top 50% of all podcasts, because there's just so many out there that don't even hit 20. So you were getting 5,000 downloads an episode. I don't think we've ever had 5,000 downloads an episode.
Yeah, no, again, I kicked myself for it. I was like, damn, that show was good.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so talk to us about like how monetization works for podcasts, because I think a lot of people have those questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, most certainly. So I'd say one is just like I would say probably just like the advertisements that you can run through your show. And you sort of do it two ways. And I can't remember the exact, but there's platforms out there where they'll automatically basically like geolocate and target ads on your podcast based on the listeners. So like I'm in New York, let's say listeners in Florida, they're going to have specific ads based on our specific states, and you can make some revenue that way. Another way might be going through and doing like sort of affiliate marketing. And what I mean by that is, let's say you had a specific product that you wanted to promote, or someone asked you to promote a product, you mention it in the interview. Let's say, again, hypothetically speaking, you promote a product, hey, get 10% off your order using code real estate jam. And then all of a sudden that code gets used, you get a kickback there. And then outside of that, you can monetize it through basically just promoting your own products and services and building up your brand recognition. So if you have a coaching program, you could have basically 3 ads. You could have it in the beginning, you could have it in the middle, you could have it at the end, and sort of just reminding people, hey, I had this coaching program, I had this coaching program, I had this coaching program. And not to like overly talk about it. I know we were talking about like those syndicators earlier, where you don't want it to be like an infomercial where it's just like jacked up on you just promoting your stuff the entire time, but enough for the audience, hey, I know what this guy does, I know what these people do. If I like it, I'm gonna go check it out. It doesn't need to be shoved down my throat. Yeah, not to get too off topic, but yeah, when it comes to monetizing, I find that's really the best aspect of it. And then of course, if your show is like really large and you're getting a ton of downloads, then you could actually go out and find like corporate sponsorships. Maybe say it's like a FreshBooks, a QuickBooks, different companies like that make sense for real estate investors trying to run their business. But again, it's going to take a little while for you to get that download. So if you have, 50 downloads an episode, they probably wouldn't want to partner with you. But if you just start getting a couple thousand, you could probably start to reach out to those companies.
Good. That's good to know.
That's great. Now, in the beginning, you had talked about people choosing to niche down on a specific topic, which I think is huge. Now, when you're trying to be a guest on other people's show or shows, do you want to be known as the expert of the one thing, or do you want to be somebody who can speak about all the different niches? What do you want to do to make yourself more valuable to the other shows?
Yeah, I find that speaking on different niches, and again, if you're someone that is an expert in multifamily, as an example, that's the only niche that that's the only thing that you're going to talk about. Where I find that, let's just say for our clients, we try to pull like unique stories for them. So obviously I'm coming on here and I'm talking about guesting on podcasts or just podcasting in general. Outside of that, I could always talk about investing in real estate on my own. I could talk about paying off $90,000 in student loans. There's a whole host of things I could talk about. So I like to give it up to the host themselves to give them options. But if I'm very specific in that, say, multifamily niche, like what can I talk about? Are there like certain horror stories? Can I talk about, say, leaving my W-2 job to go all in? Can I talk about bringing on my family members, maybe my wife, into the business and what that looks like? Like, what is different from you as a multifamily investor than the other multifamily investor down the street? Yeah, it's great. You have 500 million in assets, but so does this guy, and so does this person, so does this person. That number sounds flashy. It sounds great. But it's like, okay, but really what differentiates you from the other person? Because how many times have you heard someone say, I'm ex multifamily investor, I have 500 million in assets, I have 5,000 units or 4,000 units, give or take the different numbers, give or take the different locations within the country. But you got to like do something more than that. You got to offer a little bit more substance than that, because I don't know, it's just been recycled so many times. And there's just, not to say it's not good, but there's so many successful folks out there where it's like, you got to figure out something a little bit different other than just that success that we can share with the audience. Maybe it's something very specific, but again, just trying to figure out something else.
Yeah,
For sure.
definitely. And when it comes to attracting guests onto your podcast, one, provide them with a platform to speak and do all that. But we get a lot of people that are always like, "Hey, how did you get so and so on the podcast? I heard your podcast; it was great. How did you get so and so on your podcast?" And 90% of the time, the answer is, Melissa just asked them. Like, that's it. Just ask them. Sometimes you have to go through some gatekeepers and other bullshit, but a lot of the times, I think with any celebrity or celebrity in the real estate space, people feel like they're untouchable, but based off the masterminds we're in and the people that we know, majority of them are just regular dudes. So you just ask them if they want to be on the podcast. A lot of I don't think we've had anybody that flat out said no, I'm not going to do it. So some say, hey, here's my calendar link and you got to book it 3 months out. Some of them say, well, let me get back to you on that or something like that, but nobody's been like, absolutely
Gary Vee
not.
has not answered me.
Well,
and I've tried to get through all of that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do something special for Gary Vee, I guess, if we need to get him on. But if he just asks them, we probably also don't have a direct line to Gary Vee. I imagine.
Yeah, it's probably a little difficult.
Yeah.
He has his own VAs on top of VAs on top of VAs writing his stuff and responding back. But he ghosted you. He didn't say no.
Yes.
It's still a maybe until we don't get it. So I think that's a big thing. I'm not really sure if podcasting is for everyone, but everybody definitely has a story. And if you've been in real estate or any other specific niche for any amount of time, there is knowledge that you have that other people don't have, and they want to hear about it. So I think it's important to share your story, get it out there, and it helps in maybe not monetized, but it helps in so many different other ways, establishing your credibility, giving you a chance to articulate your thoughts on camera so that you can repurpose the content. And we use a lot of them for like individualized, personalized coaching calls, where you have some sort of platform, some sort of audience that you can share with the guest, but then the guest comes on like you and gives us tactical advice that we can put together in our business and move forward. And I think that's huge. I guess my recommendation is everyone should start a podcast and everyone should try to be on podcasts.
But you got to be consistent.
Yeah, definitely.
And if your downfall is that you're inconsistent, don't do it.
Yeah, it's a waste of time.
Right.
Trevor, what do you think? Should everyone start a podcast?
I would say probably no. Obviously I see the benefit of it, whether you're going out there and starting your own show or going on other people's shows. I just find too many people just think it's going to be the quick, easy success. And then they're just going to just stop doing it. And I think everyone has a story to share, but it's again, how consistent can you be? Yeah. How quickly do you think the overnight success is going to come? And not to backtrack a little bit, I just wanted to make a mention real quick. When you're talking about, I know you're talking about Gary Vee and getting good guests on the show. I remember when I was starting the podcast, I think I was 19 years old doing the recordings from my dorm room. And I was able to pretty much get the majority of guests on my show that I had wanted. I don't know if I ever reached out to Gary Vee back at that time, but I was talking to these, super high net worth, individuals. Now they, continue to blow up since then. But hey, I was just like a college student and I said, hey, do you want to be a guest on my podcast? And they're like, yeah, sure. At the end of the day, the worst that can do is you reach out to these folks and then they just don't respond to you. Yeah. And I think when I did it, I created like a guest list of like 50 folks to be a guest on my podcast. And we're talking like Elon Musk and like Donald Trump and all these folks, like super hard to reach individuals. And this was before Trump was even running for president. So hopefully it was a little easier back in the day, probably not as easy now, but I just threw it all out there. And I think I got 1 out of the 50 on the show. His name was Mike Dillard, a super successful entrepreneur. And then I just piggybacked off his name. And I was like, hey, Mike Dillard's been on my show. You want to be a guest on my show? And
that's good.
And all of a sudden I got like, who was it? It was Jay Papasan. I think he was like co-author of The Millionaire Real Estate Investor, got him on the show. again, now I've had Mike Dillard, Jay Papazan on my show. You want to be a guest on my show? And just kept like name dropping one after another. So again, the first big name is going to be the hardest, but once you get them, you can sort of like parlay it. And so again, not to digress and just to go back to that original question, I don't think everyone should have a podcast. Just again, it's a ton of work and you really got to show up on it. Some people are just better at being guests than they are better at being hosts.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
That's good.
That's for sure. Well, Trevor, if anybody in our audience is looking to get on more podcasts or start their own podcast, figure out more of this information, where can we send them so they can check out what you guys are doing and see if you might be a good fit for what they're doing?
Yeah, of course. So they can just go to our website, Podcasting You. So that's just podcastingyou.com, or they can just check me out on LinkedIn or Instagram. That's just going to be my name, Trevor Oldham, and they can just shoot me a message there, and I'll be happy to connect there as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Trevor, for being on our show.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you later.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Jam. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, check out our website, therealestatejam.com, or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Real Estate Jam. If you have any questions, feel free to drop us an email at therealestatejam@gmail.com. See you next episode.